Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The wedding was small, not for lack of love, but because Aim's mother said they didn't need noise. Let your husband show you love in your home, not in front of a crowd, she had said with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. Chizzy didn't argue. She wore her mother's old lace blouse, refitted by a tailor to make it modern, and held Aim's hand with the quiet joy of a girl who believed she had found home. Their first rented apartment was at the edge of town, barely painted, with a leaking tap and metal windows that groaned when the wind picked up. But Chizzy made it warm. She pasted quotes on the wall, swept the compound herself every morning, and learned to cook the agouti the way Aim liked it, thick, spicy, and filled with bushmeat. When their first daughter came, and later, a son, she felt complete. Even when Aim stayed out late or picked up calls in the other room, she told herself every marriage had its storms. She only needed to hold on. But the small things began to sting. Mama Ifeoma, Aim's mother, visited without warning, always with a critic's eye and a tongue like sharpened glass. You let the children run barefoot? Why is your soup watery like this? This house is not fit for my son. She called Chizzy by her full name only when she was upset, which was often, and never once said thank you. Still, Chizzy smiled. She thought if she could just be patient, things would smoothen. Aim, after all, had once been the boy who wrote her love notes during NISC and called her my piece. So when he started spending more time at his mother's shop than with his own family, she convinced herself he was simply stressed. The children would ask, "Mommy, where's Daddy?" And she'd say, "He's working hard for us." She swallowed silence like medicine. She believed that enduring meant loving. There was one evening when she sat outside alone, the children already asleep inside, and she stared into the dark stretch of sky that hung above the compound. Someone in the next flat was playing old Ace's songs, and the slow rhythm wrapped around her like a question. She realized she couldn't remember the last time she and Aim had laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but real, stomach-deep laughter. She missed it. She missed the version of herself that used to dance barefoot in the kitchen, waiting for him to come home with fresh corn. Now, even when he arrived early, the air between them was heavy. One night after folding his clothes, she found lipstick on the collar of a shirt she hadn't seen him wear in weeks. Her hands trembled, but she said nothing. She folded it quietly and placed it on the shelf. Because sometimes love feels like endurance, and she hadn't yet learned that the two were not the same. The compound held 6 flats, and everyone knew everyone. Children shared homework and bowls of soaked Gary. Women passed cooking spices through kitchen windows, but Chizzy was never truly one of them. Her neighbors were polite but distant, as if they could sense something fragile in her presence. Maybe it was the way Mama Ifeoma walked around like she owned the whole building, speaking loudly in the common area and eyeing anyone who dared offer Chizzy comfort. She came too often, stayed too long, and always ended with a complaint. One day it was the curtains. "These are the colors of mourning, Biko." Another day it was the way Chizzy bathed the children. "You'll give them cold." Sometimes Chizzy would retreat to the bedroom just to avoid confrontation, only to hear laughter shared between Aim and his mother in the parlor, their jokes edged with something that excluded her entirely. She kept quiet, not because she was weak, but because peace had started to feel like something she needed to earn. Aim, in those days, drifted further into his own world. He started locking his phone. He no longer waited for her to serve his food. Sometimes he wouldn't even eat. At first, Chizzy thought maybe the pressure of fatherhood was finally weighing on him. He'd come home, sigh deeply, toss his bag on the sofa, and sit staring at nothing for long minutes. She wanted to ask him what was wrong, but the look in his eyes silenced her. When she did gather the courage to speak, it always ended in a short, clipped reply or a wave of the hand. "I'm not in the mood." "You talk too much, Chizzy." The distance between them was no longer metaphorical. It lived in the way he turned his back to her in bed, and how he answered her with half a face, half a heart. Yet when Mama Ifeoma arrived, he came alive, laughing, debating, taking long walks to the junction with her, while Chizzy stayed home changing diapers and boiling yam. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Chizzy sat on the floor with her son sleeping on her lap. She had just returned from the market, soaked halfway through because the Kiki man refused to wait out the storm. Mama Ifeoma was there again, sitting cross-legged on the couch like royalty, watching an old Igbo movie on full volume. The smell of burnt okra from the kitchen filled the house, but no one moved to fix it. Chizzy looked around and felt like a guest in her own home. She wasn't allowed to decorate the sitting room. Mama Ifeoma had changed the center rug without asking. Even her children now ran to their grandmother first when they got a bruise or needed help with their shoes. That day, she folded into herself, not in defeat, but in the quiet recognition that her place in the house was shrinking. She had become invisible, not because she had nothing to say, but because no one cared to listen. It was past midnight when Chizzy woke to the glow of Ames' phone screen lighting up the bedroom in pulses. He lay beside her, asleep, his mouth slightly open, one arm flung lazily across the bed. The phone buzzed again, silent but persistent. Something in her chest fluttered, not curiosity but dread. She hesitated for a long moment, staring at the name on the screen, Nina Hair Vendor. But when she opened the message, the contents had nothing to do with wigs. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through the chat. There were photos, unclothed, bold, shameless, and words that made her eyes sting. Not one woman, not two. Multiple threads, different names. Compliments, rendezvous, lies layered in casual affection. Her throat tightened. For a moment, she felt like she had stepped outside her body, watching herself stand still while the world blurred. The man beside her, the father of her children, her partner in vows, had built a private world of pleasure where she didn't exist. She didn't wake him. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, the phone resting on her lap like a wound. The baby inside her kicked softly, and she placed her hand on her belly, willing herself to stay calm. But calmness was a stranger that night. At dawn, when the sky was still wearing its pale blue hush, she confronted him, not with shouting, but with the phone held out like evidence in court. "Is this who you are now?" she asked, voice low but burning. Aim didn't respond immediately. He rubbed his eyes, took the phone, and frowned, not with guilt, but annoyance. "Why are you going through my phone?" he muttered, tossing the phone on the bed as if it were nothing. That response broke something inside her. She stood up, slammed the drawer shut, swept his cologne bottle onto the floor. "I've given you everything," she cried. "My youth, my strength." He cut her off with a scoff and walked away, muttering that she was acting dramatic. That dismissal, more than the messages, was what splintered her. The argument didn't end there. Chizzy moved through the house like a storm. She grabbed his shirts and flung them into the corridor. She slammed pots, yanked out the drawer where he kept love notes from years ago, and ripped them apart, piece by piece. Her pain needed a sound, a witness. She shouted, wept, cursed. The children woke and began to cry, confused and frightened. Neighbors peeked from their balconies. And still, Ames stood there, unbothered, watching her unravel like she was a stranger throwing a tantrum. At one point, he picked up his phone, not to apologize, not to stop her, but to make a call. He stepped outside, and Chizzy heard him say just 2 words before the door shut behind him. "Mummy, come." That call would change everything. But in that moment, all she felt was betrayal, thick and alive, wrapping itself around her like rope. The compound was unnaturally quiet when Mama Ifeoma arrived. The children had been taken next door by a concerned neighbor, and the only sound was the hum of a faulty ceiling fan inside the flat. Chizzy stood near the kitchen sink, her back turned, hands trembling as she washed the plate she had already washed 3 times. The air was heavy with leftover anger. She didn't turn when the front door creaked open. She already knew who it was. The scent of stale perfume and camphor soap announced her. "You think you can disgrace my son and go free?" Mama Ifeoma's voice boomed through the house, soaked in fury. Chizzy turned slowly, exhaustion written into every line of her face. "Your son is cheating," she said, her voice low. "He broke our home." The older woman didn't reply with words. Instead, she stormed forward and struck Chizzy across the cheek. The sound of the slap echoed like thunder. Shock rooted Chizzy to the ground for a heartbeat. Then the second blow came, and with it, the realization this was not a mother-in-law. This was war. The blows were not soft. They were the kind that left behind bruises shaped like fingers and grief. Chizzy stumbled backward, hitting the kitchen table with her side, her hands flailing to protect her face. Mama Ifeoma shoved her hard, and she fell. Her stomach hit the edge of a stool, and for a split second time paused. A sharp pain sliced through her middle. She gasped. Her knees hit the floor. "I'm pregnant," she tried to say, but the words came out like a whisper. Mama Ifeoma didn't care, or didn't hear. She kept yelling, kept raining curses, her voice full of rage and triumph. In the hallway, Ames stood watching, his phone still in his hand. He didn't say a word. Not to his mother. Not to his wife. The pain in Chizzy's belly deepened. A warm wetness began to spread down her thighs, and then the world shifted sideways. She saw the ceiling blur, felt her body grow weightless and heavy at once. Then everything went dark. The hospital room smelled like bleach and silence. Chizzy woke to the sound of a machine beeping steadily beside her. Her mother sat in a plastic chair by the bed, her eyes red from crying. When Chizzy opened her mouth, nothing came out, but her mother reached for her hand and held it tight, whispering a prayer neither of them fully believed. The nurse came in quietly, adjusted the drip, and said, "You're stable now." But the baby didn't make it. The words fell like stones in water. Chizzy didn't cry. She simply turned her face to the wall and closed her eyes. Outside the window, the sun was rising, but the light felt wrong, too bright, too harsh. She had entered the hospital carrying life. Now she carried silence. And somewhere in the same city, the man who helped build this pain was likely moving on with his day, untouched. In that sterile room, beneath white sheets and blinking monitors, Chizzy let go of the last hope that marriage alone could shelter her heart. The morning she left, there was no grand decision, no loud goodbye. It was in the way she folded her clothes with calm hands, and how she packed the children's toys in silence. Her mother stood by the doorway of the hospital ward, holding a small nylon bag that contained Chizzy's slippers and a bottle of malt. No one from Ames' side had called. Not once. Not after the bleeding, not after the loss. Even as she stepped out of the hospital gate, there was no car waiting, only her uncle's dusty Toyota, parked near a puddle from last night's rain. She didn't ask where they were going. It didn't matter. Anywhere but that flat. Anywhere but under that roof where her screams had meant nothing. As they drove, she looked out the window, watching the world blur by. Women selling roasted plantain, children chasing tires down narrow streets, a preacher yelling beside a kiosk. The city was still moving, unaware that a piece of her had stopped existing. Her mother's house smelled of menthol and old newspapers. The parlor was small, with a ceiling fan that spun slowly and made clicking sounds like a tired clock. Chizzy sat on the edge of a narrow mattress on the floor, her back against the wall, her arms wrapped around her knees. The children played quietly in a corner, sensing the tension in the air, but too young to name it. Her mother brought her hot rice and fish stew, the same meal she used to make when Chizzy was in secondary school and came home crying after exams. "Eat small," she said gently, placing the plate down. But Chizzy didn't lift the spoon. Her eyes stayed fixed on the wall, where a calendar from 3 years ago still hung, untouched. That evening she lay beside her daughter on the mat, stroking the child's braids, breathing slowly. It was not peace, not yet, but it was a kind of stillness she hadn't felt in months. No footsteps charging in, no voices raised, no fear curling in her stomach, just a quiet that held space for healing. Meanwhile, the house she left behind shifted without her. Aim didn't say much when he realized she was gone. His only real concern was the silence, no children crying, no plates clattering, no faint humming from the kitchen. The house felt too big suddenly, too still. He told his mother Chizzy had decided to be stubborn and waved off her response. Within a week, Mama Ifeoma brought someone new to him, a soft-spoken woman named Abigail. She wore subtle makeup, spoke with confidence, and called Mama Ifeoma Mummy from the first meeting. "This one will obey," she said with a smile. Aim didn't argue. He was tired of tension, tired of confrontation. Abigail was easy, agreeable, on the surface. The introduction happened quietly. No ceremony, no announcements. Just like that, Chizzy's place was replaced, and Aim never looked back. Not yet. But the house knew. The walls still held echoes. The bed still remembered softer hands. And somewhere deep within, Aim had started to notice a hollowness he couldn't name. Abigail moved in without fuss. She brought in new curtains, changed the sofa covers to a cream color that stained easily, and replaced the children's old drawings on the fridge with framed motivational quotes. At first, Aim found the change refreshing. Abigail greeted him with a smile every evening, and served him steaming meals without asking too many questions. She laughed at his dry jokes and complimented his shirts, even when they were wrinkled. She listened, but not deeply, and not for long. The house began to feel neat, almost staged, like a showroom more than a home. She didn't ask about the children or where they stayed now. She didn't mention Chizzy. And Aim, grateful for the lack of conflict, chose not to speak either. But under the surface of Abigail's politeness, something sharp shimmered, an edge he couldn't yet name. She was kind when she wanted to be, but her silence had its own weight, the kind that watched, recorded, and waited. Within a month, Abigail began to set new boundaries. The first was about Mama Ifeoma. One afternoon, she waited until Aim was home, then sat beside him with her legs crossed neatly, and said, "Your mother should call before coming. This is not a village compound." Aim laughed, thinking she was joking. But the next week, when Mama Ifeoma arrived without notice, as she always had, Abigail didn't open the door. She turned off the television, drew the curtains, and pretended no one was home. Mama Ifeoma banged on the gate until a neighbor informed her son was inside. Furious, she stormed in the next day with complaints, but Abigail stood her ground. "This is my home now," she said coldly. Aim watched the two women, his mother and his new wife, at war, but unlike before, he didn't defend either. He sat, quiet and uncertain, watching the lines draw themselves around him. The woman his mother had chosen was now the one locking her out. The tension inside the house crept in slowly, like dust under a closed door. Abigail no longer smiled as much. She started questioning Aim's calls, his late arrivals, the tone of his voice when he answered unknown numbers. If he shifted too far from her side, she noticed. If he spoke too softly, she asked questions. Her warmth became conditional, served only when she wanted something, or when there was company. Aim started coming home less, not because he had somewhere better to be, but because home no longer offered peace. The silence between them was growing again, but this time it wasn't the silence of pain, it was the silence of strangers. Abigail was beautiful, well-spoken, and smart. But she was not Chizzy. She didn't know when he needed space. She didn't understand the weight of his size. And for the first time, Aim began to wonder if comfort was supposed to feel this cold. It began with little arguments about toothpaste caps, forgotten errands, power bills, but those petty things only scratched the surface. Abigail's voice, once calm and sugar-laced, turned sharp with suspicion. She accused Aim of withholding money, of still speaking to his old flame, of comparing her to that woman who left. Aim denied the accusations, but it didn't matter. Abigail didn't need evidence. She thrived on control, and control required conflict. Her mood shifted without warning. One evening, she made his favorite meal and left a sweet note by his plate. The next morning, she refused to speak to him because he didn't return her call during a meeting. Aim found himself walking on eggshells, measuring every word, every gesture. Even the air inside the house felt tense. He missed the version of himself that once walked into his own home without a knot in his chest. Now, each evening was a toss of the coin, warmth or warfare. Their bedroom became a battlefield of silence. He often returned late, claiming traffic or work delays. Sometimes, he just sat in the car downstairs for an hour, delaying the moment he had to turn the key in the door. Abigail noticed. She always noticed. She began to mock him openly. "Maybe if I were barefoot and quiet like your ex, you'd come home earlier." Her words were laced with venom, not sorrow. When he spoke, she twisted his words. When he didn't, she accused him of hiding things. They fought about everything: her tone, his absence, the groceries, even the way he folded his shirts. One night, in the middle of another argument, she threw a glass cup at the wall and shouted, "You're just like your useless mother." The words hung in the air, sharp and irreversible. For the first time, Aim raised his voice just slightly. "Don't ever speak about my mother like that." But even as he said it, the bitterness in his mouth told him something had already snapped inside. It was during one of those long nights, lying awake on the couch because he no longer slept in the same bed, that Aim began to think of Chizzy, not with anger or shame, but with longing. Not for her body, but her presence. The steady way she used to ask him if he'd eaten, the soft hums that filled their evenings, the way she had loved their children without measure. He remembered her strength, the quiet kind, the kind that forgave more than it should have, that bore the weight of two people's flaws. He thought of her hand resting on her belly that night, her eyes wide with pain. He had stood there and done nothing. Now, in a house that no longer felt like his, beside a woman who had turned cold and cruel, Aim was forced to face what he had traded peace for: his pride, his silence, his blindness. And in that stillness, regret did not whisper, it screamed. The days grew quieter, not from peace, but from exhaustion. Aim began to avoid his own reflection. In the bathroom, he brushed his teeth without lifting his head. In the sitting room, he passed the mirror above the TV stand without looking up. When he did catch a glimpse of himself, he saw a man he barely recognized, eyes dull, shoulders slumped, skin worn from stress. His beard, once neatly trimmed, now grew in uneven patches. His laughter, once deep and reckless, had disappeared altogether. At work, he lingered longer than necessary. He volunteered for weekend duties just to delay going home. The house no longer welcomed him. It waited for him like a judge behind a bench. Abigail, now uninterested in even pretending, stayed glued to her phone, laughing at jokes he wasn't part of, chatting in corners she refused to explain. She no longer cooked. She no longer touched him. There were nights they didn't exchange a single word, and those were the calmest ones. Aim's phone, once buzzing with friends and casual banter, now sat mostly silent. The ones who used to call had long grown distant. They'd seen the wedding photos with Abigail online and moved on, assuming life had sorted itself. He tried to reach out to one or two friends, men he used to drink with on Friday nights, but the conversations felt forced. Nobody asked about Chizzy anymore. Nobody asked if he was happy. And even if they had, what would he say? That his mother no longer visited? that his home was now a place of cold stares and slammed doors, that the children barely called him, and when they did, they asked when they could see their mother again. Guilt crept in at odd hours, when a familiar sent past him at a filling station, when he saw a small handprint on a dusty car window, when a woman with braids like Chizzy's walked by. Each reminder chipped away at the wall he'd built to protect his pride. One evening, Aim came back early. Abigail was in the bedroom, laughing loudly on the phone, her voice sugar-sweet, too sweet. He sat in the parlor and stared at nothing for what felt like hours. The silence in his chest grew unbearable. He reached for his phone and scrolled through old pictures. One caught him off guard, Chizzy sitting on the floor, feeding their son with a plastic spoon, her eyes tired but soft. The children were laughing. He studied that picture for a long time. Then, with a shaking thumb, he clicked her contact. He didn't call. He just stared at her name, the screen bright in the dimness. He remembered how her voice used to calm storms, how her hands held strength he didn't deserve. He wanted to call. He wanted to say sorry, not just for leaving, but for not fighting to stay. But shame is heavy, and regret is louder when it's late. He placed the phone face down and leaned back into the silence, wondering if some doors, once closed, ever really opened again. The knock came on a slow Saturday afternoon, the kind where the sun hung lazily over the rooftops and even the breeze moved like it was too tired to work. Chizzy had just finished braiding her daughter's hair in the small parlor of her mother's house. Her son was curled on the couch with a cartoon book, occasionally glancing up to show her pictures. The knock came again, firmer, hesitant. Her mother peered through the curtain and stepped back. "It's him," she whispered. Chizzy's hands froze mid-braid. A part of her had prepared for this day. Another part wished it would never come. She rose slowly, her heartbeat steady but cold. When she opened the door, Aim stood there like a shadow out of place, thinner, quieter, older. He didn't speak at first. He looked down at his feet, then up at her face, searching for something familiar in her eyes. But the woman before him wasn't the same. The softness was still there, but it had learned how to guard itself. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, voice low. Chizzy stepped aside and let him in. The children stiffened. Her son shifted closer to her mother. Her daughter stared, uncertain. Aim sat, careful not to touch anything. The walls around him seemed to hum with judgment. Chizzy sat across from him, not beside, her arms folded, her eyes steady. "I don't want to waste your time," he began. I've made mistakes. I know that now. I thought I had time to fix things, but I see now how wrong I was." He paused, waiting for her to fill the silence, but she didn't. She let it stretch. "I shouldn't have let it happen that way. You didn't deserve what you went through. I was supposed to protect you." She studied him, not with anger, not with affection, but with the distance of someone who had walked barefoot through fire and now stood on solid ground. "I buried a child," she said quietly. "Alone." Her words weren't meant to wound, just to remind. To place truth where it belonged. Aim lowered his head, his hands clasped together like he was holding on to prayer. "I'm sorry," he said, but sorry had come too late. Chizzy nodded slowly, the way one nods when they've already made peace with not needing an apology. "I've moved on," she said, not cruelly, but clearly. "I don't wake up waiting for your return anymore." He looked at her, eyes full of regret, but he didn't try to argue. She stood, gently signaling the end of the visit. Her mother came and took the children to the back room, offering them mango slices and whispered reassurances. Aim stood, walked to the door, and turned one last time. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" he asked. Chizzy didn't answer immediately. "Children remember how you made them feel," she said. "Start there." She didn't watch him leave. She didn't need to. Some stories don't end with a door closing, they end with the silence that follows when it does. The compound Chizzy now lived in was modest, tucked behind an old church and a row of mango trees. The walls were cracked in places, the zinc roof creaked in the wind, but it held something she hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. In the mornings she tied her wrapper, swept the corridor, and greeted neighbors with a smile that was real. Her children attended a small private school nearby. Their shoes weren't always new, but their laughter had returned. Slowly, she'd begun to build again. She sold baby clothes at a stall beside the market and offered hair plaiting services on weekends. Her hands stayed busy, and her heart stayed guarded. There were nights she still woke with memories clinging to her chest like damp clothes, moments that refused to fade. But she no longer felt owned by them. She had learned how to carry her pain without letting it weigh her down. Her love had not died. It had simply changed direction. Aim, on the other hand, lived like someone searching for something in a room he had burned down himself. Abigail had moved out quietly one morning, after one final, vicious argument over money. She left a note on the center table, scribbled quickly, "You're not the man I thought you were." He didn't chase her. He didn't cry. He sat in the silence of the house and listened to it creak around him. Mama Ifioma had not returned since Abigail had slammed the gate on her face. His phone barely rang. The laughter that once filled his world had vanished. Sometimes he walked past the school where his children now studied. He never entered. He simply stood across the street, watching them play at break time. One day, his son spotted him and froze. They locked eyes. The boy didn't wave. Aim turned and walked away, his throat tight. Regret, he'd learned, wasn't loud. It was quiet. It lived in the things you could never say, in the footsteps you no longer had the right to follow. Chizzy's story didn't end with a new man, or a miracle, or a sudden triumph. It ended with her learning to live without fear, with evenings spent under the mango tree, watching her children race barefoot in the red dust, with learning how to laugh without guilt, how to sleep without rehearsing pain. She didn't tell her children to hate their father. She simply told them the truth in pieces they could carry, age by age. One day, when they asked why she left, she said, "Because sometimes love isn't supposed to hurt that much." That was enough. She watered her plants every Sunday, wrote in a journal only she read, and prayed, not for a man to return, but for peace to stay. And in that quiet life, and a home she built with her own hands, she found the kind of joy that didn't need permission. Not every story ends with going back. Some stories begin only when we finally walk away. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.